grateful for being graded a D+, but I'm not sure actually that's a grade that I would ever have been happy with in school, and it's certainly not a grade that I'm particularly happy with in government either. But I think it just really emphasises the point that there's an awful lot that this government needs to do to improve the lot for families in this country. There's not a lot of point in shooting the messenger for being given a D+. You've simply got to work harder and do better. And I recognise the points really that are made in the scorecard, that many of the good policies that we have already announced that will make a significant difference, I think, to families' lives. Sometimes there is a time lag before families actually experience that on the ground. And one of the obvious areas actually is around tax policy. We know there are huge pressures on families to do with cost of living. That's precisely the reason why we took that decision to take so many families who are low paid out of paying income tax altogether, 900,000 already. But of course we have a bit of a time lag before the others are taken out of tax. That was announced in the last budget, but a bit of a time lag before the others are taken out of tax at the start of the next financial year. It's also the reason why the government took the decisions it did to try and have an impact on fuel prices, for example. We know has a real impact on families. The decision to freeze council tax, decisions around the basic state pension that we know has an enormous impact as well. But we also know that there is an enormous amount still to do. And probably the most important thing that a government can do if it's going to ease the pressures on families in the longer term is to get macroeconomic policy correct. If we don't have a stable economy, unfortunately it's inevitable that in the longer term interest rates will rise. And if there's one thing that's keeping it bearable for a lot of families at the moment, it is that interest rates are relatively low. But I'm also very aware of how changes right across government can create uncertainty. Now, in the longer term, there's no doubt in my mind that universal credit will be a revolutionary step change for many families. They're reversing the poverty trap that's kept so many people in poverty because they're capped on benefits. But as Minister for Children and Families, I'm also very aware of the concerns that FPI raised in their report card today. And I know how important it is to get the details correct. Now, that desire to think strategically across government is precisely the reason why the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister took the decision to set up a task force looking at family issues right across government. And it's been the spur for many pieces of work over the last 12 months. Many of the reviews that you would have seen, I see Reg Bailey is here today. His review is one of those reviews that came out of thinking through the task force. Frank Field, Graham Allen's reviews looking specifically at child policy. I know we have many colleagues here today who are focused particularly on that area, as well as work in my own area on early years. Just wait 1 minute. I'd just like to spend a bit of time, if that's okay, speaking about those areas I'm specifically responsible for and the work that we're really trying to do there to improve a lot for families. First of all, around access to childcare and flexible working. Now, I know that this is a real concern, particularly for parents actually in London, where costs are often as many as 26% higher than elsewhere in the country. It's also a real concern for families who have disabled children who really struggle at the moment to find accessible childcare. And we're trying to address this in a number of different ways. First of all, we've invested significant amounts more money into early years. Now, we're doing this because we believe that high-quality early education will make a huge difference to life chances. But we also recognise that this is a vitally important spur for many families that enables them to work and to be able to juggle work with family life. It's the reason why we took that decision last year to extend the free entitlement from 12.5 hours a week to 15 hours a week. And of course, we're also extending that to all disadvantaged 2-year-olds. Figures released last month showed that 38,000 more children are now benefiting from the free entitlement, and that includes 93% of all 3-year-olds. However, we do know, unfortunately, that those who are not benefiting at the moment are sometimes some of the most disadvantaged families, and this government has a lot more work to do to try and make sure that all are benefiting from that offer. But I'm also pleased to say that although we only extended that 15 hours from September last year, already 86% of children are taking more than 13 hours. So we're already seeing that benefit on the ground. But sometimes the reason why families are not taking up their full offer is because it's been a little inflexible for them to be able to manage around their work and juggling other family commitments. I made a number of announcements last year. It is the start of a number of other announcements around early years and what we're trying to do to improve quality and to improve the offer for parents. And one of the things that we announced last week was that we'll be consulting on making that free entitlement more flexible, so that you'd be able to take the free entitlement a little earlier in the day and to take it a little later in the day as well, recognising that if you have two children and you're trying to get one child out to school and to get on to work, it can be very difficult to do that and deliver your child at nursery by 8 o'clock in the morning and still be on time. And just that little bit extra flexibility we hope will make it easier for parents and mean that all children are able to benefit from the offer that we're making. We also want to provide a lot more information to parents. And we're funding the Daycare Trust to promote parent champions, provide a lot more information about what's available in a local area. Many of you will also be aware that my colleague Ed Davies has been developing new proposals to extend flexible working. We're trying to make it easier, particularly for fathers, to access parental leave and extend that right to flexible working to all employees. Now, I think this will make a step change in terms of how families organise their own family life, and will make it much easier, not just for men to be able to spend more time with their children. We know that in the longer term that has huge benefits for relationships within the family, but also remove that penalty attached as a woman going into employment, where the employer may think that you're the one who's most likely to take and request flexible working. Now, that consultation is ongoing, and I really encourage all of you to look at that consultation, to download it and to respond. I'm frozen. Right, the other thing that I really wanted to talk to you about is about what we're doing to try and remove the pressures on childhood. Now, we made an early commitment to try and address the commercialisation and sexualisation of childhood in the coalition agreement, and we know that this is a huge worry for around 90% of parents who are understandably very concerned that their children are under huge pressure to grow up too quickly, and that's why we asked Reg Bailey to carry out his review and to make robust and challenging recommendations. His report, Letting Children Be Children, was published last month, and I'm really pleased that the government accepted all of his proposals. These recommendations are based on the concerns of parents, as well as the many experts, including FPI, who fed into that review, and were intended to support parents and make sure that their views are taken more seriously by business and by broadcasters, putting the control back into the hands of parents. Now, what we can't do is to turn back the clock to the 1930s Britain. The world has changed too much, and we don't want to cut children off from the commercial or the technological world because we know it has obvious benefits. In fact, parents tell us they want to manage the issue themselves, but they want to be supported by proportionate regulation and responsible businesses. Now, I think there is an awful lot that we can do, and we're actively monitoring the implementation of Reg Bailey's recommendations. I've already had one meeting with many of the stakeholders whose recommendations really fall on. And if voluntary action is not taken, if progress is not seen by 2012, then the government will look again at this issue. The Prime Minister takes this issue very seriously, and I'm working very closely with him to make sure that we actually get real results on the ground. Keeping momentum up on this issue, as FPI's report card states, is absolutely vital. And the last area I really wanted to touch on was about educational inequality. This is one of the big areas that the report card singled out, and it's an issue that I feel very passionately about. The OECD this month demonstrated that poor children in this country are less likely to exceed expectations for educational performance than their deprived peers in almost any other developed nation. It's as if our children are uniquely less resilient to the impact of poverty than many other countries. That's simply not acceptable. At the moment, we score less in terms of social mobility than countries like Estonia, Latvia, Mexico and Slovenia. Surely there is so much more that we can do. And that's precisely why the government has invested so much in early years and made that a key plank of what we're trying to do to turn around social mobility. It's the reason why we've invested that extra money in the 2-year-old offer. It's one of the first clause that's going through the education bill that's being developed it's being debated in the House of Lords at the moment. We know that if that offer is got right, that will do an awful lot to change the life chances of children at an early stage and improve their ability to gain from what's offered to them at school. I said that I made a number of announcements last week around early years, and that, along with the other announcements I'll be making over the next few weeks, are really about how we build on that to improve the quality of the early years education that we are providing. Last week we launched a consultation on the new early years foundation stage, focusing much more critically on the 3 key areas of development we know are important for child development. That's emotional and social development, communication and language and physical development. These are the building blocks we know children need if they're going to be ready for school, ready to take advantage of what's on offer. And if you don't have the confidence and the resilience to make friends, you're going to have a really tough time when you get to school. And focusing people's minds on things like communication, I think will allow us to pick up on some of those children who are falling behind at the moment and arriving at school without the kind of speech ability to communicate that we know is vital. And speech delay at that stage, fortunately not picked up, will often result in children being on the SEN register at a later stage in their school life. I also announced changes to Sure Start Children's Centres. We want to see that universal front door, but we want the centres more focused on a core purpose, less restrictive about the detail of what they must offer, but more focused on outcomes. And we're about to begin some trials on payment by results so that we can make sure that children's centres are really focusing on the things that will make a big difference. It's also the reason why the government has invested so much in the pupil premium and the reason why we're investing in the Education Endowment Fund as well. Policies that are really designed to focus on the most disadvantaged youngsters and make sure that they are reaching their potential. Now, these are only some of the areas I know that influence family life. I'm acutely aware of the importance of other areas like housing, for example, care for the elderly, and of child protection, an area that my colleague Tim Norton has been working very hard on and making huge strides. All of these issues I know affect family life. The government is trying to take a strategic look across the piece to make sure that we try and remove as many pressures as possible on family life. But I'm aware that there's an awful lot more that we must do, and your scorecard today I will take away as a spur to do better next year. I'm absolutely determined that our grade goes up when I come back to give this speech next year. Thank you very much.
Sarah, thank you very much for doing that, and I hope your throat doesn't hurt too much. Now we've got time for some questions. I'll take them in batches of 3. Yes, in the yellow jacket over there first. There's a roving mic if you'd wait, and please tell us who you are and where you're from.
Juliet Collier, Deputy Chief Executive of Campaign for Learning. I just wanted to ask, obviously we know there's a bidding process about developing the strategic partnerships, but what mechanisms have you actually got for consulting and involving other people who aren't those identified for strategic partners? I'll give an example. We run the National Family Learning Network, which is an infrastructure organisation that supports over 10,000 opted-in members around promoting learning in families. And we don't at the moment seem to have any mechanisms for consulting or being informed. And, you know, there's lots that we could be doing. We've already got funding for that infrastructure. So just wondered what your suggestions are and what you can offer and what you've got in place.
Okay, thank you. Yes, just behind, and then one in the very front here.
Yes, something like...
Could you tell us who you are, please?
Sorry, Helen Penn from the University of East London. Around 80% of all childcare and 40% of education is delivered in the for-profit sector. Now, we know from market research that this for-profit sector is currently very vulnerable. Can you foresee a Southern Cross disaster?
Thank you, and the man right in the front here.
Thanks. I'm Rob Williams from the Bartlett Institute. And I have to say that although the overall score is D+ for last year, in our opinion it's been a pretty good year for fatherhood policy. And we know there's a lot of interest now in early years services engaging fathers in changing home learning environments, which is great. But principally, the biggest thing for us this year is the parental leave proposals from Ed Davey, which we think will transform the way families can make choices about who looks after who. And they're widely supported by the voluntary sector and also by big business. They're strongly opposed by small businesses. And having met with the Chief Executive of the British Chamber of Commerce yesterday, I think it's opposed by small businesses because they don't really understand the business case, which is actually really strong for how businesses can benefit from more flexible working. But I am worried that they're going to make a lot of noise and raise quite a lot of concern in the media about these changes. And my question is, can we count on you to keep the government firm on these proposals and not to wobble when the consultation period is over?
Okay, Juliet, I think that the most useful thing you could possibly do is to link with the officials who I know are here in the room, and they will have heard your point, and I'll make sure that somebody's in touch with you and makes use of your network. I'm not sure there's anything more useful I can say beyond that. Helen's question about a Southern Cross disaster. I mean, I think the thing about the early years sector is that it's incredibly diverse and often single handlers, actually, if you like, very, very small businesses. It's not really concentrated in large businesses. There are some larger chains, but on the whole, these are often one or two people running businesses. And yes, they are vulnerable sometimes, and we know that some of them have really struggled with footfall, but that's varied. It's a very patchy picture across the country. Some have seen footfall go up, some have seen footfall go down. It depends a little bit on what's happening to local employment markets. And that has an impact then on who buys childcare. I think some of the things that we are doing will have an impact, particularly on those who have struggled to function in disadvantaged areas. So the point I made about the 2-year-old offer, of course that money is specifically going into those areas that are most disadvantaged, and that's been the area that private providers have found most difficult to make a business case. They found it most difficult to function in the most disadvantaged areas because people aren't necessarily buying extra hours beyond their free entitlement, and this will bring in new people into those businesses, and I hope will make it more viable. I mean, it's not the only answer. The other thing we're doing is to review the code of practice, and we will have a review of school funding, which will come out at some point over the summer. And again, that will look at things like how the single funding formula is bedded down, which I think will make a big difference. Robin's point, thank you very much for your compliments on fatherhood. I absolutely agree with you on the point about flexible working. I think it will make a huge difference, and I think the business case is very, very strong, and you're right. The larger businesses know the benefits of having happy, contented employees who are able to balance their work and their family life. I'm not sure Parliament's ever learnt that lesson, but maybe that's a battle for FPI. Perhaps you can see whether you can get them to sign up to your family-friendly scheme. I'd be delighted. I think there's huge commitment across government to making this work. That's the best commitment I can give you, really. This is a very important issue, and I think it will make a big difference to family life.
Thank you. Let's have 3 more questions. I know there's one at the very far corner, and after that, gentleman with a white shirt here, and a woman over there.
Hello, I'm Belinda Phipps, MCT, charity that's interested in early parenthood when families are forming. And it's when families are forming that they first experience the enormous pressures that they go on to continue to experience through their parenthood life. And that's when they form the way that they're going to run their family. And for MCT, one of the things that we're noticing is the huge economic pressure that people are under at that time, which is made much worse by the phenomenal amount of commercial pressure on them during that time. Now, we've talked about commercial pressure on children, on turning children into adults, but what's really unknown is the level of commercial pressure on new parents to spend vast sums of money on products that are often needed, and that commercial pressure is getting to them through all sorts of routes, through the health service even. So I'm very keen to see whether we could extend that understanding that commercial pressure on children is a bad idea to commercial pressure on new families being something that we need to do something about.
Thank you. And the man down here on the front table.
Sam Royston from the Children's Society. The Welfare Reform Bill contains legislation to introduce a cap on overall benefit entitlements for out-of-work household, intended to be introduced at a rate of £500 per week. We have a number of concerns around this. We now know that this cap risks increasing homelessness, particularly in London, and that 95% of the households affected by it have children in them. We also know that this will introduce a very substantial couple penalty into the welfare system, since two lone parent families living apart may have an entitlement of considerably under £500 per week, but living together, their entitlement may well shoot up well above, hundreds above £500 per week, which would effectively force them to live apart. There will also be some very unfortunate families who, as a result of high childcare costs for a large number of children, will simply be unable to make work pay, and will be, but if they stay out of work, will be affected by the cap, forcing them into severe poverty, whatever their choices. Will you lend support to scrap this welfare cap, to avoid introducing this enormous capital penalty into the system and to keep families out of poverty?
Thank you. And there's a woman just there, second table back.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Shravani Sen from Contact Family. One of the things that has been incredibly heartening about this government is your very demonstrable commitment and significant commitment to families with disabled children. One of the things, and we think that some of the policies that and proposals from your Green Paper will really has the potential to make a huge difference for those families. One of the things I want to ask you about, though, is one of the things that we know for families with disabled children, but also families more broadly, that the key, or one of the keys to their resilience as families, is their financial stability. And we've done research which shows that at the moment, nearly 1 in 4 families can't afford to heat their homes, and 1 in 7 are actually struggling to feed themselves. How do you hope to address some of the unintended consequences of the government's thoughts around benefits, building on the point that the previous colleague made? An example being around the government's intentions to reduce the amount of disability premiums, the additional payments that families with disabled children get, which could potentially affect 170,000 families and tip them from just about hanging on by their fingertips to really going under. We know that it is absolutely not the intention of the government to make families with disabled children suffer. It's very clear that you care about those families, but it is one of the unintended consequences of some of the policies that we're looking at the moment.
Okay, there's kind of 2 questions which are very similar. The first question from the lady from NCT, whose name I didn't catch. My brother's wife's pregnant, first grandchild for my parents in the family at the moment. So I think we're just in that process of living through the how many baby clothes do you actually need to buy. His child's not even been born yet process. So it's something that I'm just smiling to myself as I'm thinking about the conversation I had with my own brother this weekend. The point that you make about the pressures that come through the NHS, I'll take that point up with my colleague Anne Milton, but perhaps if you could let us know specifically what that is, and I'll make sure that we have a think about that. Both Sam and Shravani are really asking about the welfare reform bill, and particularly Sam's point about the benefit cap. I mean, in terms of the theory behind having a cap, the theory behind having a cap is that we know that a lot of families at the moment are effectively trapped by work not paying. So, in a situation where if you can gain more in benefit than you can in work, it can be very difficult for you then to make that decision to go back into work. But if you're asking me whether or not I'm worried about the level the cap is set at, yes, I'm extremely worried about the level that the cap is set at the moment. And when I said that I think we need to get the detail right, that's exactly the kind of point that I am referring to, really. It's one thing to have a system that is designed to create positive incentives on behaviour that ought to lift families out of poverty. It's another thing to create a situation where 50,000 families, or whatever the indication from the impact assessment is, may become homeless. That's entirely another factor. It's a very different question. And I think there's a lot of detail that needs to be got right on this policy, and I think that's a view shared across government. I don't think that I'm unique in that role, but as Minister for Children and Families, this is something that I take very seriously and something that I'm very actively engaged on. And really a similar answer, I think, to Shravani's point. I will say some other points that I think about the situation for families who have a disabled child, that often the pressures for them on getting back to work are partly to do with flexible working practices, which is one of the other reasons why the right to have flexible working for all families, not just those with very young children, I think could make a real difference for them. But it's just the sheer pressure of trying to manage a system that is very bureaucratic. And certainly when I've spoken with disabled families, what keeps them in poverty is their inability to maintain work. And they can't maintain work because of the pressures on their family of fighting the system. It can become a full-time job for a lot of parents to fight the system to get the basic help that they need. Now, whatever we can do to reduce that pressure will enable families to get back into work. And I think the pressures on them are slightly different to the pressures that Sam was indicating a minute ago. Now, my office have been indicating to me that I need to go. So thank you very much for inviting me here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.